Hey folks, imagine waking up at midnight to the smell of cold stone and a chorus of owls hooting like your neighbor's Wi-Fi router dying. Yeah, that was a normal Tuesday for ancient night shifters. And if you think your 9 to 5 grind is brutal, wait till you hear why our ancestors split sleep in two. Before we dive into the gritty reasons, smash that like button if you love history with a side of midnight snacks, and drop a comment with the weirdest habit you've ever had at 3 a.m. Now dim the lights, curl up like a cat in a drafty hearth, and let the creak of timber floorboards transport you to a dimly lit courtyard where the first half of sleep feels like a warm, woolen blanket hugging your shoulders. You wake up at dawn's first sigh, the air smelling faintly of incense and damp earth, and you find yourself scrolling through a mental checklist. Did I remember to guard the goats? While the second sleep slinks back later, like an after movie that nobody asked for, but somehow feels oddly satisfying. Scientists say the split was driven by natural darkness cycles, pestilent nighttime noises, and a built-in brain reset that made medieval folks as refreshed as a coffee-addicted millennial after a power nap, only without the caffeine crash. So stick around, because we're about to untangle how daylight, moonlit gossip, and a lack of electric lights turned a simple night into a 2-act drama that would make even Netflix binge watchers blush. Ready? At the edge of the Euphrates, the sun-baked mud brick houses glowed amber as the day folded into dusk. Inside a modest courtyard, the young scribe Nabu traced symbols on a clay tablet, while the village elder Enlil rested his palm on a cool stone basin. Their conversation drifted to the village's nightly ritual: a first sleep at sunset, a brief waking, then a second sleep before dawn. Enlil described how families gathered around a low fire, shared dates, then retired to woven mats for the first rest. When the embers faded, a soft murmur of movement signaled the waking hour, during which men repaired nets and women mended garments. Finally, the night deepened, and the second sleep began, quiet as the river's low whisper. Nabu's ink-stained fingers tapped the tablet, questioning why the ancestors had chosen 2 fragments of night rather than a single, uninterrupted slumber. Enlil's eyes, lined with the dust of many seasons, lingered on the distant hills where heat rose like pale breath, hinting at a practical cause. The elder recalled stories of scorching afternoons that lingered into evening, forcing workers to pause their toil as the ground baked and the air grew heavy. Yet the notion of waking in the middle of darkness unsettled the younger minds, who imagined lost time and restless dreams. A subtle unease settled over the courtyard as the fire's last spark sputtered, the silence between breaths feeling thicker than usual. Both scribe and elder sensed a gap between tradition and comfort, a quiet tension fluttered like the moths drawn to the dying flame. When the wind shifted, carrying a cool breath from the river, the irony of the two-part sleep emerged like a gentle joke. The first rest, taken while the night was still warm, offered relief from the lingering heat that clung to stone walls. The brief waking period, though seemingly a disruption, allowed the air to settle and the village lamps to dim, ushering a deeper chill. In the second sleep, bodies curled against the cooler floor, finding comfort in the night's natural dip, a rhythm the ancestors had unintentionally mirrored. Even the cattle, lulled by the distant lowing, paused their own rest, echoing the human pattern without intent. Thus, the split slumber proved less a flaw and more a subtle alignment with the environment, a quiet punchline written in the breath of the river. As the moon rose, casting a soft cream glow over the courtyard, the villagers settled into their second repose with practiced ease. Children tucked their heads against mother's shoulders, feeling the slow rise and fall of familiar breathing. The clay jars emitted a faint, warm scent of barley stew, lingering like a memory of the earlier meal. And Lil's gnarled hand rested on a woven rug, the texture grounding him as the night's silence wrapped the settlement. Nabu, eyes half closed, traced the same symbols by memory, the movement of his stylus as steady as the river's current. In that calm, the notion of a fragmented night softened, becoming simply another thread in the tapestry of daily life. When dawn finally painted the horizon with pale amber, the village stirred, its inhabitants emerging from sleep as if from a shared dream. The two-part slumber had left bodies rested yet attuned to the day's rhythm, a reminder that human needs often bend to the land's subtle cues. Nabu sealed his tablet, his ink drying like the quiet resolve that settled in his shoulders. Enlil's smile, faint as the sunrise, held a quiet pride in the perseverance of a practice born of necessity and later embraced as comfort. The river, now glinting with morning light, whispered past the stone walls, echoing the sentiment that history sleeps in pieces. Each pause a breath between stories. Thus the villagers carried forward the lesson that imperfection can become ritual, and that the simplest of habits may hold the deepest of meanings. At the edge of the fertile plain, the first dusk settled like a sigh on the stone houses, and the people lowered their woven mats to wait for the sun god's lingering warmth. Enlil, whose voice echoed in the wind, told them that Shamus still watched the first half of night, a pale ember against the cooling air. The scent of drying grain drifted from the granaries as families gathered, their breath forming faint clouds in the amber glow. Children pressed their cheek to the cool mud walls, feeling the subtle pulse of the day that had not yet fully fully yielded. The lamps flickered, casting shadows that hid the gods' faces in soft blur, while the earth kept a quiet, steady heartbeat. Soon the darkness deepened, and Nabu, the scribe of night, found himself balancing reverence with the ache of human fatigue. He traced the worn clay tablets that instructed 2 watches of sleep, feeling the chill of stone beneath his fingertips as he contemplated the practical strain of waking twice each cycle. The women knotted ropes to secure the shutters, their hands trembling slightly from the weight of the night's cold. A distant owl called, its hoot reverberating off the mud brick walls, reminding Nabu that the moon goddess Ishtar would soon take the watch. He whispered a muted prayer, his words lost to the darkness, his own eyes heavy with the strain of mediating tradition and necessity. The villagers, accustomed to the rhythm, unfolded their routines with a quiet irony, as if the split sleep were a polite joke played by the heavens. They ate a second modest meal of flatbread and dates after the first rest, the crumbs scattering like tiny constellations on the low table. Laughter, thin and sleepy, rose when a farmer yawned mid-story, his beard brushing the rough cloth of his cloak. The moon's silver wash brushed the courtyard, but the goddess's face remained concealed behind a veil of night fog. In that moment, the practical hardships and sacred guidelines intertwined like 2 threads in a loom, each tugging gently at the other. As the second watch approached, a calm settled over the settlement like a warm blanket over a tired child. The sound of gentle breathing filled the narrow lanes, and the quiet clink of clay mugs being set aside marked the end of the evening's labor. Ishtar's unseen presence was felt in the cool breeze that brushed the sleepers' foreheads, a soft sigh that seemed to smooth the furrowed brows of the elders. The night air carried the faint aroma of incense, a reminder that reverence could be a quiet comfort rather than a command. With each breath, the people eased into the final rest, their bodies syncing with the universe's measured pulse. When sunrise finally pierced the horizon, the villagers rose with a measured grace, their eyes adjusting to the gold that spilled over the rooftops. Nabu stood at the doorway, his tablet in hand, noting the subtle shift in the day's temperature as a quiet testament to the night's dual guardians. He sensed that the split sleep, once a strict ordinance, had become a gentle habit woven into the fabric of daily life. The blurred silhouettes of the deities lingered in memory, not as distant mandates, but as comforting shadows that had guided the night. In the lingering warmth, the community carried forward a lesson that human imperfection can find harmony within the ancient patterns that once seemed rigid. When the summer sun lingered long over the riverbank, the village hearths glowed with a gentle amber as the day surrendered to dusk. The air grew thick with the scent of wilted barley and distant cicada chorus, while shadows stretched across the thatched roofs. Nightfall brought a subtle rustle of brush, the low growl of wolves that prowled beyond the field's edge, reminding the people that darkness held more than dreams. Elders whispered that a single, uninterrupted slumber left the hearth vulnerable to both heat and predator, a thought that settled like dust on the stone floor. Thus the rhythm of the evening began to shift, hinting at a new pattern beneath the familiar lull. The first night of divided rest arrived with a tentative pause as the younger hunters lingered by the fire, eyes flickering between fatigue and alertness. At the hour when the moon rose thin, a small group rose to guard the granary, their feet soft on the cool clay, while the rest curled in the cool of the reeds. The watch was punctuated by the occasional snap of twigs, a reminder that the night was alive with unseen movement. Yet the early sleep left the children rubbing sleepy eyes, their heads heavy as the soft wool blankets clung to their shoulders. The village felt a tight knot of nervous anticipation, a subtle tension between safety and the yearning for uninterrupted dreams. Soon the split schedule became a source of quiet irony, as the youths complained about waking before dawn, only to return to a half-filled sleep after the watch. The elders, faces softened by years, smiled with a muted humor that seemed to linger in the smoky air, their eyes reflecting the flicker of the fire rather than the complaints. The double rise and fall of the bodies created a chorus of yawns that echoed through the narrow lanes, a rhythm that felt both purposeful and oddly disjointed. While the night watch kept predators at bay, the village's own rhythm grew fragmented, each pause a reminder of the compromise between vigilance and repose. In the gentle murmur of the evening, the irony settled like a thin veil over the communal hearth. With each passing week, the split sleep settled into a quiet routine, the villagers moving like slow water through familiar channels. The first watch ended with a soft sigh of relief as the guards returned, their hands still tinged with the cool of the night breeze, while the sleepers rose with the faint glow of sunrise dusting the walls. Meals were shared in the pale light, bread broken with a steady hand, the taste of honey soothing the lingering drowsiness. Children learned to weave short naps between chores, their small feet patting gently on the sun-warmed stone, and elders watched with a calm that mirrored the steady river beyond the fields. The community, now attuned to 2 breaths of night, found a balance that felt both protective and oddly harmonious. In the quiet years that followed, the story of the 2-part slumber became a soft footnote in the village's collective memory, a reminder that human habits bend to the weight of environment and need. The elders, their faces now blurred by the soft shadows of dusk, would often sit by the fire and note how the night's whisper taught patience more than fear. Younger generations, having grown accustomed to the rhythm, would sometimes glance at the empty watch post and feel an unspoken gratitude for the simple vigilance that had shaped their days. The village's history settled into a gentle cadence, each breath of night a subtle lesson in compromise and the modest humor of survival. As the seasons turned, the lingering heat of summer evenings and the low cry of distant owls continued to lull the people into a sleep that was never wholly whole, yet somehow perfectly theirs. When the first clouds gathered over the low river valley, the air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth, and the villagers felt the wind tug at their reed-thatched roofs. Nabu, the village scribe, watched the sky from the courtyard, where children chased a loose wooden hoop, their feet stirring the soft mud. The elders, their faces lined by years of harvest, gathered around the central fire, its orange glow flickering against the stone walls. They spoke in low tones about the ancient habit of dividing the night into two rests, a rhythm once taught by travelers from distant lands. As the sky darkened, a low rumble hinted at a storm that might threaten the stored grain, prompting the community to adjust their usual calm routine. The first half of the night was set to become a vigil, a quiet watch over the vulnerable stores. The wind soon rose, rattling the shutters and carrying the sharp scent of rain that clanged against the clay pots in the market stalls. Thunder rolled across the hills, echoing through the limestone alleys where artisans paused their weaving to listen. Nabu felt a tightening in his chest as the storm's fury brushed the granaries, the thatch roofs trembling under every gust. The elders, eyes narrowed against the gray light, instructed the younger hands to secure the doors with heavy wooden beams, their fingers rough against the damp stone. The villagers moved in a slow, methodical rhythm, their breaths visible in the cold air as they labored under the growing pressure. Tension lingered like the heavy clouds, yet a shared purpose steadied each step, binding the community together in a collective focus. Ironically, as the storm reached its peak, the ancient custom of a split sleep emerged as a practical solution rather than a ceremonial relic. The people settled into a first sleep, a brief, shallow rest taken on woven mats while the rain hammered the rooftops, their eyes opening at each crack of thunder. Nabu noted how the blurred silhouettes of the elders, their faces hidden by the dim firelight, shifted positions to keep watch, their shadows dancing against the walls. When dawn's pale light threatened to break through the clouds, the villagers awoke, their bodies stiff yet alert, and prepared for a second, deeper sleep after the storm's lull. This pattern of a short vigil followed by a restorative pause, seemed to stitch together the frantic night, offering a rhythm that matched the storm's own pulse. The irony lay in how a centuries-old habit, once thought obsolete, now provided the framework for survival. When the rain finally eased, a soft patter replaced the roar, and the air grew cool and fragrant with wet grain husks. The community slipped into a second sleep, this time lying on soft blankets spread across the warm embers of the hearth, the gentle crackle soothing their nerves. Nabu felt the weight of fatigue lift, his breathing sinking with the faint rhythm of distant water dripping from the eaves. In the dim glow, the elders' faces remained indistinct, their hidden expressions suggesting both relief and quiet pride as they listened to the steady breaths of those around them. The calm of this restorative pause allowed muscles to loosen, minds to settle, and a collective strength to rebuild after the storm's test. As the night deepened, a serene silence settled over the village, wrapping the people in a gentle, shared lullaby of endurance. By sunrise, the granaries stood intact, their thatch roofs slick but unbreached, and the villagers emerged with dusted hands and soft smiles. Nabu recorded the night's events, noting how the dual dream had turned a moment of fear into a lesson of balance between vigilance and rest. The elders, their silhouettes still softened by the morning mist, nodded to the young ones who now understood the value of pacing one's effort. The community gathered for a modest breakfast of flat bread and fresh cheese, the taste of which seemed richer after the night's ordeal. In the lingering quiet, each person felt a quiet gratitude for the rhythm that had guided them, a reminder that human patterns, even those inherited from distant ancestors, can still nurture strength. The story of the night closed like a gentle sigh, leaving the valley bathed in a warm, amber light that promised more days of measured effort and patient sleep. When the flood receded, the village gathered on the cracked stone platform to discuss how the night had been divided between watch and sleep. Elders traced the cool river mist on their forearms, recalling how the first watch saved the grain stores from burning. They agreed that the two-part rest, born of necessity, should become a shared rule, a gentle rhythm for future generations. A tablet of baked clay was placed at the center, its surface still warm from the fire that had heated the evening stew. The decision settled like dusk, settling over the rooftops, quiet and unhurried. Yet some younger men whispered that the new law would steal precious hours from the fields, their voices rustling like dry wheat. They feared that splitting the night would leave the midday heat unbroken, making the labor of plowing feel heavier. The council listened, the wood of the bench creaking under the weight of the argument. A heated debate flickered like the oil lamp's flame, each side pointing to the night sky as proof of their claim. In the end, a compromise was forged, allowing a brief pause between the two watches for a short moment of shared quiet, and the decree was etched into the town's stone walls. The scribe's stylus traced the words with a deliberate, almost lazy motion. The next morning, mothers rose before sunrise, feeding their children while the first watch still lingered, as if the law were simply a suggestion. Farm hands paused their work at the appointed hour, but many lingered by the river, letting the cool water wash away the stiffness of their shoulders. Ironically, the formal schedule seemed to reinforce the very rhythm it aimed to regulate, turning a legal line into a familiar habit. Even the youngest boys, who had never known a continuous night, fell into the pattern without protest, their eyelids drooping in the same predictable manner. Days settled into a pattern as smooth as the clay that formed the kitchen pots, with the first rest ending at the soft glow of the evening fire. People would sit on low benches, sip warm barley tea, and listen to the distant owl's low hoot, feeling the world pause between the two sleeps. The second watch arrived with a gentle chill, and families retreated to their reed mattresses, the scent of jute fibers mingling with the night air. Silence settled over the village like a thin blanket, broken only by the occasional creak of a door or the rustle of a goat wandering home. In that stillness, the split rest became a quiet covenant, a shared breath that linked generations without the need for grand proclamation. Later, the scholar Nabu, his face forever hidden in the shade of his study lamp, copied the agreed verses onto a fresh tablet, his quill moving like a soft breeze across the surface. He noted the practical reasons, the environmental chill of the night wind, and the communal trust that had woven the practice into daily life. His record was placed in the archive hall, where dust settled like gentle snowfall, awaiting eyes of distant descendants. Centuries later, travelers would lean against the same stone walls, feeling the coolness that once prompted a split rest, and the story would echo in their sleep. Thus, the ancient wisdom endured, not as a rigid command, but as a quiet reminder that humanity often finds balance in the spaces between. In the chill of an 11th century dawn, the stone corridor of St. Murray Abbey echoed with the low toll of a bronze bell, its reverberation slipping through the thin walls of the dormitory, where novice Brother Aldrich lay on a rough, hewn straw mattress. The first light filtered through narrow slit windows, painting the cold floor with pale amber, and Aldrich felt the subtle shift from wakefulness to the gentle pull of the first sleep. As the bell sounded again after a few hours, a quiet rustle of woolen cloaks marked the monks' rise for a brief vigil. The air, scented with incense, and damp stone. The prior, an aging figure whose face was forever half shadowed by the candlelight, whispered that the night was meant to be split. A rhythm older than the walls themselves. Aldrich, still half dreaming, listened to the distant clatter of wooden doors and the soft murmur of prayers, sensing the first part of the night unfurling like a slow tide. The rhythm of two sleeps, he thought, seemed as natural as the rise and fall of the bell itself. Yet the novelty of waking in the middle of darkness unsettled Aldrich, whose fingers traced the chill of the stone hearth as he stepped into the dim hallway where the fire still glowed weakly. The cool air brushed his cheeks, and the distant howl of a lone wolf slipped through the open cloister, weaving a tension that felt like a thread pulled too tight. He found himself watching the candle flames flicker against the worn tapestries, each wavering light casting shadows that seemed to question the purpose of this nocturnal pause. The prior's counsel, spoken in a hushed tone, lingered like the scent of wet earth after rain, offering practical tasks, sorting parchments, mending a torn robe. Yet Aldrich sensed an undercurrent of doubt, as if the night itself were testing his patience. The clang of a distant hammer from the workshop punctuated the silence, reminding him that the world outside the cloister kept its own relentless rhythm. In that uneasy interval, Aldrich felt the weight of an ancient habit pressing against his modern weariness. Irony settled softly over the monks when they discovered that the wakeful interlude, meant for devotion, often became a quiet bargaining with boredom. A half-lit candle would be nudged aside to read a illuminated manuscript, only for the ink to blur under the sudden draft. The prior chuckled, his voice a low scrape against the stone, noting that the monks now spent the night's middle hour arguing over the best way to fold a linen shroud, a task far removed from the lofty prayers they had once whispered. The bell's second toll arrived like a polite reminder, yet some monks lingered, eyes half closed, savoring the absurd comfort of sharing a stale loaf while the fire sputtered. Aldrich observed how the monks' murmurs turned to light jokes about the moon's lazy path across the sky, a gentle mockery of their own solemnity. The night, with its segmented sleep, seemed to mock the very notion of relentless toil, offering a pause that was at once practical and whimsically human. As the second bell faded, the dormitory settled into a slower cadence. The monks reclined once more on their straw beds, the air now warmed by the rekindled fire that painted the walls in a soft orange glow. The rustle of night clothes became a lullaby, the faint crackle of the hearth a steady heartbeat that guided thoughts toward a quiet rest. Aldrich felt the stone's coolness against his back ease, the texture of his rope belt gently reminding him of the day's duties now behind him. The prior, eyes dimmed by the candle's waning light, offered a simple nod, conveying approval without words, as the monks exhaled in unison, breathing in the scent of smoked wood and faint herbs. The rhythm of first and second sleep blended seamlessly, each period flowing into the other like a slow river finding its course. In that tranquil hush, the monastery seemed to inhale the night, releasing a calm that steadied the mind and softened the edges of the day's labor. When Aldrich eventually left the cloister to wander the nearby villages, he carried with him the memory of the dual slumber, a practice that would ripple outward across the patchwork of medieval Europe. Travelers spoke of the night broken into two halves, of quiet hours spent stitching, reading, or simply listening to the wind through thatched roofs. And these stories mingled with local customs like a gentle tide. The pattern of segmented sleep settled into the rhythms of farmers, artisans, and scholars, each adapting the pause to their own hearths and workshops, finding in it a modest freedom from relentless toil. Aldrich reflected on how a simple bell, a stone corridor, and an aging prior had shaped a subtle cultural shift, reminding him that history often moves as slowly as a sigh. The lingering scent of incense and wood smoke, now a distant echo, continued to stir a quiet amusement in the mind of anyone who paused to consider how the night itself had been divided, not by decree, but by the soft, unhurried pulse of human habit. In that lingering thought, the past felt both present and distant, a reminder that even the smallest rhythms can leave lasting traces on the tapestry of time. In the waning light of the 12th century, a quiet rhythm began to drift through the cobblestones of market towns and the stone corridors of castles. The long night was no longer a single curtain of darkness. Instead, villagers rose from their first slumber, brushed the cool straw from their sheets, and lingered in the dim glow of oil lamps. This practice, later called segmented sleep, spread like a whispered gossip, carried on the breath of travelers, and the soft creak of carriage wheels. In the great hall, a lord would pause his feast, gaze out at the moon-streaked courtyard, and invite his retainers to sit on the cool benches while the fire smoldered. The air held a faint scent of herb-steeped water, and the distant clatter of a blacksmith's hammer, marking the first hour of wakefulness that was neither work nor deep rest. Observers noted how the body seemed to settle into a gentle pulse, as if the night itself were breathing in measured breaths. As the habit settled, scholars in cloistered scriptoria began to record the oscillation of sleep with careful ink, their illuminated margins dotted with tiny owls perched on moonlit scrolls. Some monks, whose vows tied them to nocturnal vigils, frowned at the newfound lull between the two watches, fearing that the interruption might loosen the discipline of prayer. In a bustling tavern, a merchant whispered to his clerk that the split night could invite thieves, for the dark interval provided a veil for whispered bargaining and silent doors. The tension rose like a thin fog over the riverbank, as inked diagrams showed the lengthening of the first sleep and the shrinking of the second, suggesting an uneasy balance. Yet the very act of noting the pattern seemed to calm the nerves, for the parchment gave the phenomenon a shape that could be examined rather than merely felt. The scribe's pens moved slowly, each stroke a reminder that even a restless night could be measured and perhaps understood. In the quiet interlude, a group of young maidens slipped from the forge's glow to exchange verses beneath a maple, their laughter muffled by the night's hush. Secret lovers, hidden behind tapestry folds, used the brief waking hour to trade a single rose or a whispered promise, turning the interval into a covert ceremony of affection. Minstrels who once performed only at midday now found an eager audience of candle-lit faces, their strings humming while the night wind brushed the shutters. The irony lay in how the very pause meant for rest became a stage for whispered conspiracies. The silence, punctuated by the soft clink of goblets and the rustle of parchment, even the castle's steward, whose duties were to guard the pantry, took the moment to taste a stray piece of honey cake, smiling at the absurdity of indulging between two sleeps. The scene unfolded with a gentle humor, as if the night itself were amused by humanity's habit of filling every crevice with purpose, no matter how fleeting. Over the following years, the split sleep settled into the rhythm of daily life, its presence as familiar as the rooster's crow at dawn. Villagers would rise, sip warm broth beside the hearth, and then settle back into their blankets, the second sleep feeling like a soft sigh after a brief conversation. The lanterns dimmed to an amber glow, casting long shadows that swayed with the flicker of fire, while the night air grew cooler and carried the scent of damp earth. On castle walls, illuminated manuscripts displayed the pattern with calm diagrams, the once sharp quills now drawing smooth curves that suggested acceptance. The murmurs of prayer, storytelling, and quiet negotiations blended into a single, low hum that the stone walls seemed to absorb, leaving no room for alarm. In this steadiness, the night became a companion rather than an unknown, its brokenness softened by the steady beat of human breath. When later chroniclers looked back, they noted that the segmented night revealed more about the human appetite for connection than for sheer comfort. The practice taught that sleep, like any habit, can be bent without breaking, and that the spaces between can hold as much meaning as the moments of repose. the faded faces of saints and prophets, forever obscured by candlelight, served only as silent witnesses to the mundane negotiations of night. Scholars wrote that the interval's quiet allowed a pause for introspection, a gentle reminder that even in darkness, people can find a thread of continuity. The legacy of those midnight murmurs lingered in the gentle cadence of modern evenings, where a pause before sleep still invites a soft conversation with a loved one or a lingering page of a book. Thus, the medieval split sleep remains a subtle lesson. Humanity, ever restless, can carve rhythm from the night's own breath, and in doing so, learns the modest art of being present even while half asleep. In the modest streets of a 13th century market town, the clatter of carts grew louder as evening shadows stretched across the cobbles. Merchants, having finished the daylight exchange, set up low-lit stalls where the scent of roasted chestnuts mingled with the cool river breeze. Lantern-handed watchmen paced the perimeter, their boots thudding softly against stone, while townsfolk retreated to their chambers for the first portion of sleep. The quiet pause between the day's labor and the night's watch felt like a shared breath, a practical interlude that allowed both commerce and vigilance to coexist. Within these segmented hours, the rhythm of life settled into a gentle, measured cadence. Soon a harsh wind carried whispers of pestilence, and the town's infirmary windows fogged with concern, casting a pall over the twilight market. Clerics, their faces obscured by the dim glow of candles, issued edicts that demanded uninterrupted devotion and a return to a single, continuous night of prayer. The sudden decree echoed through narrow alleys, unsettling the accustomed hum of nighttime trade, and causing some traders to lower their shutters earlier than usual. Yet the watchmen, their eyes weary yet alert, continued their patrols, feeling the chill of stone walls beneath their gloves. The tension between the need for safety and the call for solemn stillness left the town in a hesitant equilibrium. Irony settled like a thin mist over the square as the market's lanterns flickered despite the church's insistence on silence. While priests whispered prayers behind veiled arches, a thief slipped through a shadow, only to be caught by the diligent guard, whose lantern cast a steady circle of light. The townspeople watched this quiet drama, the blurred visage of a saint hidden in the stained glass above, unnoticed by all but the faithful. The paradox of needing darkness for spiritual contemplation, while simultaneously depending on the watchful glow of human eyes, was not lost on anyone. The soft rustle of parchment notes recorded the odd balance, a reminder that practicality often outlasts idealism. As months slipped by, the town settled into a new routine where the night market opened briefly after the first sleep, then closed as the second watch resumed. The air grew warmer with the scent of spiced stew drifting from open doors, and the sound of low conversation blended with the distant toll of the town bell. Watchmen's steps grew more measured, their presence a comforting backdrop rather than a reminder of danger. Merchants arranged their wares in modest piles, allowing the lull between purchases to blend seamlessly with the pause between watches. In this calm, the segmented sleep pattern felt less like a compromise and more like a natural cadence of daily life. Later chroniclers, penning their accounts by candlelight, reflected on how the night watch had become a quiet testament to human adaptability. They noted the faint echo of footsteps on stone, the lingering warmth of ember-lit stalls, and the subtle, enduring patience of a community that learned to share its darkness. The memory of those half-night awakenings lingered like a soft sigh, reminding future generations that progress often arrives in measured, unhurried breaths. The town's story, recorded in modest ink, carried a gentle moral that even in fragmented sleep, people can find a rhythm that honors both safety and the everyday hum of life. The lingering scent of wood smoke, now a nostalgic perfume, sealed the narrative in a calm, reflective hush. In the cool stone hall of the University of Paris, the autumn light filtered through leaded windows, casting an amber haze over scattered scrolls and wooden benches. Scholars and merchants gathered to discuss a practice that had slipped into daily rhythm, the splitting of the night into two rests, known among the city's bakers as the first sleep and the second sleep. The scent of damp wool and roasted chestnuts lingered as participants sipped weak ale, their eyes half opened, as if already tasting the wakeful interval between the two sleeping periods. Outside, the Seine murmured over cobblestones, echoing the quiet impatience of a city accustomed to long shadows. The council's purpose, recorded in a faded parchment, was to examine whether this habit served the body, the soul, or the market. When the first theologian rose, his voice resonated like a low chant, recalling ancient monastic rules that praised uninterrupted night vigils. He warned that waking in the dark could invite restless thoughts and temptations. A physician countered with the cool touch of a parchment diagram, pointing to pulse and breath, asserting that the human body naturally favored 2 cycles, and that the quiet hour allowed the humors to settle. A merchant, sleeves stained with flour, spoke of the practical benefit. The interval gave his apprentices time to tend market stalls before the night market reopened. Their words brushed against each other, creating a low hum of disagreement that filled the chamber like the soft rustle of parchment. The air grew denser, as if the stone walls themselves were listening for a resolution. As twilight deepened, the meeting stretched into a night-long symposium, the candles guttering, while the participants shuffled between sitting and standing, their sleeves brushing dusty tables. An unexpected chuckle rose when a baker confessed that he often used the pause to rehearse a hymn he had never learned, his voice cracking like a cracked loaf. The irony was palpable. Those who urged constancy found themselves slipping into the very rhythm they debated, nodding off between debates, only to awaken with a sigh. The council's minutes recorded a brief pause where the room fell silent, the only sound the distant toll of a church bell, marking an hour that no one could precisely name. In that quiet, the participants sensed both the comfort of shared fatigue and the absurdity of arguing over a habit born of darkness. When dawn's pale light finally brushed the stained glass, a senior cleric stood and offered a measured observation that blended reverence with cautious pragmatism, declaring the bifurcated sleep a gift that mirrored the world's own cycles of light and shadow. He noted that the interlude could nurture contemplation, yet warned that idle hours might also invite mischief if left unchecked. The council listened, their faces softened, the tension easing like a slow exhale after a long prayer. The discussion concluded with a gentle agreement to allow the practice, while suggesting minor guidelines to keep the wakeful gap purposeful rather than idle. The attendees filed out, their steps echoing softly on the cold stone, each carrying a small, unspoken promise to respect the rhythm that had quietly governed their lives. In the weeks that followed, the streets of Paris settled into a pattern where shutters closed twice, and the city's nocturnal pulse matched the measured breathing of its inhabitants. Bakers rose before the first sleep to knead dough. Merchants used the brief interval to tally ledgers by candlelight, and scholars found a moment for quiet reading before the final rest. The subtle shift was felt more in the gentle hush of alleys than in grand proclamations, a reminder that even large debates often end in ordinary adjustments. Children, tucked between blankets, awoke briefly to hear a whispered lullaby before drifting back to sleep, their breaths syncing with the night's two embraces. History would later note the council's decision as a modest footnote. Yet, for those who lived through the softened nights, it became a quiet testament to human capacity to negotiate rhythm with restraint. In the dim half-light of a 12th century manor, the night was divided by a quiet pause, a gentle sigh between two sleeps. The first slumber fell as the hearth's fire dwindled, its amber glow softening the stone walls, while distant oxen murmured in the courtyard. People rose at the witching hour, their fingers brushing the cool parchment of a candle-lit manuscript, or sharing stale bread with a neighbor in the stillness. The second sleep returned after the small hours, when the moon had climbed higher and the wind brushed the shutters. This rhythm, stitched into daily life, felt as ordinary as the turning of the grain, yet carried a subtle echo of human need for reprieve. When iron gears began to tick in the town squares, the cadence of labor shifted like a loom being rewoven. Mechanical clocks, with their bright faces, marked the hours with a relentless clang that cut through the night's hush. Artisans adjusted their work to the new beats, letting the first sleep shrink as the bell tolled earlier, urging them to finish a stitch or hammer a nail. The pause between sleeps grew shorter, its cool air now tinged with the scent of oil and soot from the newly lit workshops. Tension settled in the cottages as the familiar lull was replaced by a measured impatience, the old gap feeling like a missing stitch in a familiar tapestry. Yet the people, ever fond of stories, tucked the waning interval into the folds of folklore, whispering of spirits that lingered in the watch between sleeps. Minstrels sang of a sleepy fox that prowled the village lanes, its eyes half closed, while mothers told their children of a hidden hearth that only glowed for those who rose at night. The irony lay in the fact that the very clocks meant to order time now reminded folk of a timeless pause, a quiet joke the world played on its own schedule. Even as the second sleep faded, the language of first watch and second watch lingered in legal documents and market charters, a linguistic shadow of a vanished rhythm. This gentle humor softened the change, turning a loss into a quiet cultural footnote. Gradually, the night settled into a single, uninterrupted stretch, the hearth's glow lingering longer, the candles burning steadier until dawn's first gray. Workers learned to pace themselves without the nightly intermission, their hands moving at a slower, more deliberate tempo that mirrored the soft tick of the clock. The rooms grew quieter, the occasional creak of a floorboard marking the only disturbance in the deep, continuous sleep. In kitchens, the smell of simmering stew rose slowly, filling the house with a warm, comforting perfume that seemed to hold the night together. The transition felt unhurried, as if the world simply turned a page without fanfare, allowing the old habit to dissolve into the background of everyday life. Centuries later, scholars note the lingering ghost of that medieval pause in the modern feeling of sleep inertia, that drowsy resistance when the alarm chimes too early. Folklore still mentions the watch in quiet corners of old libraries, its verses echoing in the soft sigh of a reader turning a page at twilight. The legacy of segmented sleep rests not in grand monuments, but in the subtle way people still pause to stretch, to look out at the faint glow of street lamps, to taste the coolness of night air before rising. It reminds us that our bodies have once been attuned to a rhythm that respected both work and wonder. A balance now remembered only in the hush between heartbeats. In this gentle remembrance, the story closes with a calm acknowledgement of human imperfection and the enduring, sleepy humor of history. As the sun lowered itself behind the olive grove, a gentle orange light filtered through the portico of Lucius' villa, catching the dust motes that lingered in the summer air. Lucius, his toga slightly damp with the day's heat, called the household to gather in the atrium, his voice low enough not to disturb the cicadas. The servants, already moving with practiced ease, began to close the bronze shutters, letting the evening cool drift inside. A faint breeze carried the scent of rosemary from the garden, mingling with the faint aroma of figs that had been left to ripen on the stone table. In that quiet convergence, the day slipped away, making room for the night's ritual to begin. A subtle tension rose as the oil lamps were dimmed, their flames shrinking to a hesitant glow that barely pushed back the growing shadows. The cook, a broad-shouldered man named Gaius, laid out a modest cena of lentil soup and a few dates, his hands steady, but his eyes scanning the room for any missing cup. The slaves shuffled on the cool marble, their sandals whispering against the stone, each aware that a misstep could disturb the delicate balance of the evening. Lucius watched the small motions, feeling the weight of his role as the household's anchor, while the children perched on the steps shifted restlessly, their feet tapping a restless rhythm. The air grew cooler, and a quiet anticipation settled like the hush before a soft rain. When the family bowed their heads to utter a prayer to Somnus, the unseen faces of the deities lingered in the dimness, their forms blurred by the wavering light. A servant, balancing a tray of wine cups, accidentally brushed against a lamp, sending a brief sputter that caused the flame to dance erratically. The unexpected flicker drew a soft chuckle from the older matron, her laughter barely louder than the rustle of the pergola vines, turning the solemn moment into a gentle parody of ritual. Lucius, slight smile hidden beneath his serious demeanor, adjusted the lamp and allowed the brief interruption to settle like a ripple on a still pond. The irony of a prayer for peaceful sleep being momentarily disturbed by the very act of lighting the night felt almost inevitable. Yet it passed with a quiet grace. Soon the lamps settled into a steady amber glow, casting long, lazy shadows across the mosaic floor. The murmurs of conversation softened as the family shared the light cena, their words low, like distant waves lapping against a shore. A cool night breeze slipped through the open arches, brushing the skin of those seated on the stone benches, bringing with it the faint scent of wet earth from the nearby garden. Children, now drowsy, rested their heads against their mothers' cloaks, while the slaves, having completed their tasks, took a moment to stretch their limbs under the waning light. The entire household seemed to inhale the evening, exhaling a collective sense of stillness that settled like dust on the columns. In the lingering hush, the night wrapped the villa in a soft, unhurried blanket, reminding each participant of the fragile rhythm that binds daily life to sleep. Lucius, watching the dimming embers, felt a quiet appreciation for the orderly cadence that his ancestors had cultivated, a pattern that survived despite the countless imperfections of human hands. The shadows on the walls, elongated and indistinct, mirrored the blurred faces of the ancient gods, suggesting that even reverence is a gentle veil over the ordinary. As the household drifted toward dreams, the villa stood as a muted testament to the timeless desire for rest, a subtle reminder that history often rests in the small, unremarkable moments. The night, indifferent yet tender, held the world in a patient pause, allowing the simple act of sleeping to become a quiet act of continuity. When the last morsel of garam's seasoned fish is cleared from the low tables, the triclinium sighs into emptiness, its marble benches cooling under the lingering glow of oil lamps. The master of the house, a dignified patrician with a faint smile, rises from his recline, his sandals making a soft scrape on the polished floor. Servants, their hands already dusted with the day's flour, begin to lift the couches, the wood creaking in a rhythm that matches the fading chatter. A thin breeze drifts through the portico, carrying with it the scent of rosemary and the distant clatter of a market closing. In this quiet transition, the house seems to hold its breath, aware that the public display of feasting is giving way to private rest. A subtle tension rises as the slaves carefully stack the couches against the walls, their movements precise yet hurried, aware that the night will soon demand silence. The master gestures to a senior slave, his voice low, ordering that the woolen strigils be laid out in neat rows across the cold mosaic. The younger servants exchange quick glances, their fingers brushing the rough fibers, feeling the slight chill of the stone beneath. A muffled footstep from the atrium signals a guard's patrol, reminding everyone that security, too, must be maintained even as the day ends. The air grows cooler, and a thin veil of unease hovers, as each participant knows the night will test the order they have painstakingly built. Irony settles in the corners of the chamber when the lavish banquet's remnants are swept away, leaving only the plain necessity of a sleeping mat. The matron of the household, once the heart of the evening's laughter, now arranges her own modest pallet of linen beside the polished foot of a slave's simple pillow, a quiet reminder that rank fades in the darkness. Even the emperor's portrait, gleaming on the wall, watches unseen, its features blurred by the soft shadows of the dying flame. The slaves, who earlier polished silver, now tuck their own blankets beneath the same strigils, sharing the same cool floor that once supported the weight of guests. A faint chuckle escapes the steward as he notes the equalizing hush that follows the clamor of wine, the room itself seeming to smile at the gentle absurdity of civilization's nightly routine. The lamps dim to a flickering amber, casting elongated silhouettes that sway gently with the night breeze slipping through the open casement. Voices retreat to whispered prayers, their tones muffled by thick curtains, while the hearth's ember glows low, radiating a comforting heat that seeps into the stone slabs. Each cubiculum, whether richly draped for a patrician or sparsely furnished for a freedman, holds its occupant in a soft cocoon of woven wool, the texture brushing against tired skin like a quiet benediction. Outside, the distant toll of a bell marks the hour, its resonance a steady metronome that steadies the pulse of the household. In this tranquil hush, the house settles into a rhythm as ancient as the city's foundations, the day's labor dissolving into the gentle pull of sleep. When dawn's first pale light brushes the rooftops, the occupants rise slowly, their movements a mirrored echo of the night before. The master pauses by the doorway, eyes lingering on the arranged strigils, reflecting on how such simple rituals stitch together the fabric of daily life. Slaves fold the woolen mats with careful hands, their motions a silent acknowledgement of the continuity that binds generations. The lingering scent of night jasmine mingles with the fresh aroma of the morning bread, a reminder that both pleasure and fatigue are fleeting visitors. In this quiet aftermath, the house feels both unchanged and subtly transformed, its walls holding the soft imprint of human imperfection, humility, and the ever-gentle passage of time. As the sun dips behind the tiled roofs, the spacious domus of a Roman villa settles into a slower rhythm, its marble thresholds bathed in amber light. The paterfamilias, a figure of quiet authority, moves through the atrium, his sandals softly echoing on the mosaic floor as he assigns each night's berth. The family's private chambers, lined with woolen curtains and cushioned benches, are reserved for the matron and her children, their doors closing with a gentle click. Beyond the peristyle, a modest stone dormitory waits for the freedmen and slaves, its narrow bunks arranged in rows that whisper of shared breath. A subtle hush settles, punctuated only by the distant murmur of evening preparations. As the household begins its nightly choreography, soon the night watch arrives, their boots striking the cobblestones in a rhythmic, metallic clatter that drifts through the courtyard like a distant metronome. In the cramped dormitory, the air grows warm and heavy, the scent of oil lamps mingling with the faint odor of straw. The slaves settle onto their narrow wooden slats, their movements careful, wary of the creaking floorboards that seem to amplify every footfall. A faint tension threads through the room as the faint glow of the torchlight paints shadows on the walls, reminding each occupant of the thin line between safety and exposure. Outside, the watch's lanterns swing, casting intermittent glints that flicker across the villa's stone walls, a reminder that vigilance never fully rests. Ironically, the elite chambers, though secluded and luxuriously appointed, are not immune to the same nocturnal soundtrack. A muted thud from the courtyard sometimes rattles the polished silverware in a nearby drawer. The matron, draped in a soft linen stola, glances toward the open balcony where a servant adjusts a curtain. Her expression, a blend of amusement and resigned tolerance. In the dormitory, a slave rests his head on a rolled linen sack, his eyes already half closed, as an older freedman mutters a sleepy joke about the watch's shoes being louder than the emperor's decrees. The shared experience of nocturnal sounds creates an unspoken camaraderie that bridges status, even as each side clings to its own modest comforts. A faint smile spreads across faces that might otherwise remain stern, acknowledging the common humanity of waiting for rest. As midnight deepens, the clatter fades into a distant murmur, and a cool breeze slides through the open atrium, brushing the marble columns with a gentle caress. The torches dim, their flames turning amber to smolder, and the dormitory settles into a hushed stillness, the only audible rhythm the slow, even breathing of those within. The private chambers exhale a quiet sigh, curtains drawn, allowing the night's darkness to pool over the sleeping forms like soft water. The temperature settles to a comfortable chill that draws a blanket tighter around shoulders, while the distant hoot of an owl drifts across the roof tiles. In this shared silence, the villa feels less a hierarchy of rooms and more a single organism breathing in unison. When dawn eventually tinges the horizon with pale gold, the villa awakens with a collective stretch, each resident carrying the imprint of the night's subtle lessons. The paterfamilias rises first, his robes rustling, and pauses to listen to the faint echo of a distant footstep that has long since passed, a reminder of the watchful presence that guarded their slumber. The sleepers, whether in private chambers or the communal dormitory, emerge with a quiet resignation, their bodies marked by the same tired muscles that once carried them through the day's toil. This nightly routine, woven from simple gestures and quiet sounds, reflects a timeless truth that even in a world of pronounced hierarchy, the basic need for rest binds all humanity together. In the modest pause between day and night, the Roman household finds a fleeting glimpse of unity, a gentle affirmation of shared imperfection and endurance. As the sun slips behind the Palatine, the marble streets of the city begin to cool, and the amber glow of oil lamps flickers against the stone facades. Families pull shutters closed, their hands brushing dust from wooden shutters as they settle onto low benches near the hearth. The clatter of wooden water buckets fades, replaced by the soft hiss of oil lamps stoking a modest warmth in narrow atria. In the distance, the first footfalls of the vigils echo along the cobblestones, their wooden shields tapping rhythmically against the pavement. A quiet anticipation settles like a thin veil, signaling the transition from day's labor to night's guarded repose. When darkness deepens, the city's shadows grow longer, and the watchmen's lanterns cast thin circles of light that dance on the pavement. Their boots, polished yet weary, produce a steady thud that seems to measure the passing hours, while the occasional distant bark of a stray dog pierces the stillness. Citizens peer from curtained windows, eyes narrowed against the night chill, listening for the faint scrape of a thief's rope or the soft rustle of a prowling animal. The vigils pause at each alley, their lanterns swaying as they scan the walls for any sign of disturbance. A faint, uneasy hum rises from the street, a collective breath held in the quiet anticipation of unseen threats, and even the stone statues seem to lean closer, as if to hear the murmur of uncertainty. Yet within this wary vigil, a subtle irony flickers like the lamps themselves. A young watchman, his armor still bright, stifles a yawn that escapes the night's solemnity, and a passerby drops a stray olive into a gutter, only to watch it roll away unnoticed. The gods' shrines perched on household walls receive a midnight offering of a tiny incense puff, their faces forever blurred by the soft veil of candle smoke, suggesting reverence without a visible gaze. A merchant, returning from a late market, offers a polite nod to the vigils, his sack of wheat clanking gently, as if to remind the guards that ordinary trade persists even under watchful eyes. The juxtaposition of solemn duty and mundane gestures softens the tension, turning the night's patrol into a quiet choreography of human habit. In this modest tableau, the grand concern for safety is tempered by the simple, almost comedic, persistence of daily routines. Soon the lanterns dim to a gentle amber, and the rhythmic steps of the vigils give way to measured, slower strides as they finish their rounds. The city settles into a hushed rhythm. Doors close with a soft thump. Shutters creak gently as they are secured, and the distant murmur of the Tiber flows like a low lullaby. Inside homes, the flickering shadows of the oil lamps caress the walls, while a family offers a modest libation to the unseen deity, the ember light reflecting off the polished bronze of the altar. The air turns cooler, carrying the faint scent of baked bread and lavender, mingling with the faint perfume of incense that lingers near the shrine. In this calm, the night feels less like a threat and more like a shared blanket, gently draped over the collective breaths of Romans, both guard and worshipper finding a shared moment of rest. When the first hints of dawn begin to pale the eastern sky, the nocturnal order leaves a quiet imprint on the city's memory, reminding inhabitants of the balance between vigilance and surrender. The ritual of watchful patrols, paired with humble offerings, underscores a timeless human desire to shape uncertainty with structure. Even when the faces of divine protectors remain unseen, the subtle choreography of lamps, footsteps, and whispered prayers becomes a testament to how ordinary actions can weave a fabric of safety that endures beyond any single night. In reflecting on this nightly pattern, one perceives a gentle moral, that the peace of rest is not merely granted by gods or guards, but cultivated through the steady, patient habit of countless small gestures. Thus, the Romans' nightly rest, guarded by both human eyes and blurred divinity, stands as a quiet illustration of humanity's perpetual quest for ordered calm amid the inevitable darkness. At the first pale note of the rooster, the domus stirs, shutters creak as the matron pulls them open, letting a thin ribbon of dawn weave through the atrium. The cool stone floor beneath her sandals carries the faint echo of her husband's soft steps, already moving toward the courtyard. A bowl of water glints in the early light, catching the gentle splash of a hand that scoops it for the family's morning wash. Children rub sleep from their eyes, while the household slave lights a modest lamp, its flame flickering against the pale walls. The rhythm of the day begins with a quiet, disciplined cadence that mirrors the orderly rows of the earlier night's sleep. When night settles, a thin veil of darkness drapes over the insula, and the watchman's wooden baton taps against a metal pipe, signaling the shift of the vigils. The air inside the rooms grows cooler, the stone walls retaining the day's heat only to release a faint chill that settles on the backs of the sleepers. A distant clatter of a pot being carried up the narrow stairwell interrupts the quiet, prompting a fleeting glance from the matron toward the doorway. The tension of unseen threats, burglars, fire, the occasional cold draft, tightens the muscles of those who must remain alert even as they lie on rough woolen blankets. Yet the night passes, measured by the slow ticking of oil lamps that burn just enough to keep the darkness at bay without brightening the world. Ironically, the very routine that imposes order on the night also allows small rebellions. A servant slips a draught of cheap wine into the cup of a tired patrician, and a whispered joke about the weight of the night's schedule curls through the dimness. The matron, whose hands have traced the same patterns of linen for years, smiles faintly, aware that the disciplined sleep schedule is both a comfort and a restraint. A child, curled in a corner, murmurs a half-dreamed rhyme that drifts like incense, unnoticed by the adults busy aligning their lives to the calendar of the gods. The juxtaposition of strict schedule and human levity creates a gentle tension that underscores the night's inevitable surrender to sleep. In that moment, the house feels both a prison of order and a cradle of quiet defiance. When the candles finally gutter, the house settles into a deeper stillness. The hearth's ember glows amber, casting a warm hush across the tiled floor. The matron pulls a woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the soft grain of the fabric against her skin as she watches the shadows lengthen. A faint scent of dried figs lingers in the air, mingling with the cool smell of night-blooming jasmine drifting through the open shutters. The family, now fully cloaked in sleep, breathes in unison. Each exhale a soft sigh that merges with the distant hoot of an owl. The disciplined rhythm of the night, once marked by watchful eyes, now rests in the gentle pulse of the household's collective heart. At daylight, the memory of the night's ordered calm lingers like the faint imprint of a hand on warm stone, reminding each generation of the quiet power in routine. The Romans, with their precise timing of meals, baths, and sleep, left a subtle blueprint that still whispers in modern homes where curtains are drawn at the same hour and lamps dim in sync with dusk. Their legacy is not a grand monument, but a soft, persistent invitation to honor the still moments between work and wakefulness. As history watches from its weary perch, it smiles at the modest continuity of a simple nightly pause, a testament to humanity's enduring search for balance. In the quiet echo of that ancient night, we find both our ancestry and our own gentle, imperfect need for rest. Along the fertile bend of the Nile, the day's heat clings to the mud brick houses as the sun lowers into amber. Priestess Nefertari, whose silhouette is softened by the waning light, steps beside her apprentice Kem, whose hands tremble like reeds in a gentle breeze. Together they lay a small tray of dates and incense on a low stone altar, the offering meant for the unseen moon god, whose face remains hidden behind a veil of night. The villagers gather, drawn by the scent of frankincense, and the quiet rustle of papyrus mats, curious about this new cadence that will mark their evenings. In this first breath of the ritual, the air feels both tender and expectant, as if the river itself pauses to listen. As darkness deepens, the rhythmic croak of frogs mingles with the distant clatter of clay pots, creating a murmur that unsettles some of the older women. They whisper about sleepless nights and the unfamiliar cadence of a shared offering, their eyes flickering toward the dim silhouette of the altar. Kem feels the weight of the moment in his palm, the cool stone grounding his uneasy pulse, while Nefertari watches the shadows stretch across the sand, her own doubts veiled behind the same obscured light. The tension builds like a slow tide, each heartbeat echoing the soft thud of a drum that has yet to find its rhythm. Yet the villagers remain, their bodies folded on woven mats, waiting to see whether the ritual will calm the night or stir a new unease. When the first ember of incense sighs upward, a faint chuckle seems to ride the wind, as if the moon itself smiles at the earnestness of the scene. The offering, simple figs, brushed with oil, rests quietly, its modesty contrasting with the grand expectations of a celestial audience whose face stays blurred behind the night's veil. An old fisherman chuckles, noting how the same river that carries their boats now carries their hopes, a gentle irony that settles like dust on the stone. The ritual proceeds with measured steps, each participant moving as if in a dream, the sound of their sandals on cool stone barely audible. In that quiet absurdity, the community discovers that the act of collective pause is itself a soothing lullaby, regardless of any divine response. Soon the cool night air settles over the settlement, the heat of the day fading into a soft, breathable hush. The lanterns flicker low, casting warm amber pools on the walls where shadows dance lazily, and the villagers recline, eyes half closed, the rhythm of the offering now woven into their breathing. Nefertari and Kem stay near the altar, their faces still hidden in the dim glow, feeling the steady pulse of the community settle into a shared sleep pattern. The river's gentle murmur becomes a lullaby, and the distant hoot of an owl punctuates the silence like a metronome. In this calm, the night feels orderly, each household slipping into rest as the moon watches, unseen yet steady. In the years that follow, the nightly offering becomes a quiet tradition, its origin recalled in hushed conversations by the firelight. Children grow up hearing the soft story of a blurred priestess and her apprentice, the tale folding into the broader memory of how a simple act shaped the village's rhythm. Scholars later note the practical effect. The communal pause reduced the need for individual night watches, allowing families to sleep in longer, deeper cycles. Yet the true legacy rests in the gentle reminder that human imperfection can birth order, that a shared pause can cradle a community. As the Nile continues its endless flow, the echo of that first moonlit offering remains, a subtle thread stitching past to present in the quiet fabric of daily life. Along the banks of the Nile, the village of Kem settled into a rhythm as steady as the river's flow, and each evening the air filled with the thin smoke of frankincense, curling like faint letters across the twilight. Women gathered on low mats, their palms brushing the cool clay as they laid amulets of copper and beetle shell beside the sleeping huts, while men whispered low chants that rose and fell like the distant sigh of the water. The stars emerged one by one, pale and unhurried, and the soft hum of a water jar being lifted and set down marked the passage of the night. Children, eyes half closed, traced the patterns of the constellations with fingertips, feeling the night's gentle weight settle on their shoulders. In this quiet ceremony, sleep arrived not as a sudden darkness, but as a slow, shared descent, each breath measured against the glow of oil lamps. When the season grew dry, the river receded, and the cracked earth exhaled a hot, dusty breath that clung to the village walls. The same incense burned, yet its scent seemed to linger longer, swallowed by the parched air, and the rhythmic chants grew quieter, as if the voices themselves were stretched thin by the heat. Families began to question whether the protective amulets, once placed with confident hands, could still hold back the unforgiving sun that now threatened their fields. The nightly gatherings persisted, but a new tension rippled through the rows of mats, each participant feeling the weight of survival press against the ritual's familiar cadence. Even the stars seemed dimmer, their cold light muted by a veil of swirling dust that made the night feel less like a sanctuary and more like a waiting room for an uncertain dawn. Yet the villagers, with a weary smile, continued to offer their incense, the smoke now curling in tighter spirals that seemed to mock the drought's severity. The chants, though softer, carried a thread of irony. Words meant to summon protection now sounded like a lullaby for a restless world, their syllables slipping through the cracks of cracked pots and sun-baked stones. An elder placed an extra amulet on the doorway, its surface reflecting the flickering flame, and remarked in a voice that tasted of sand, even the desert hopes for a night's rest. Children giggled at the soft creak of a reed flute, its notes barely audible over the distant rustle of dry leaves, as if the instrument itself were sighing. This subtle humor, hidden in the ritual's persistence, offered a gentle reminder that habit can be both shield and smile when the world grows harsh. Gradually, the community settled into a quieter version of their nightly rite, The incense burned in smaller bowls. The chants shortened to a steady pulse that matched the heartbeats of those who stayed awake to tend the remaining grain. The amulets were rearranged, each one now resting close to a water jar that had been salvaged and refilled from a distant well. Its cool surface offering a fleeting touch of relief against warm palms. The night air, though still dry, carried a faint scent of damp earth after a rare, brief drizzle, and the villagers breathed it in, feeling the night's blanket thicken just enough to hold them together. The stars, unchanged in their distant indifference, provided a constant backdrop, their light reflected in the still water of the jar, creating tiny glimmers that seemed to echo the steadiness of the village's resolve. In this softened ritual, the people found a measured peace, a rhythm that accepted the limits of their environment, while still honoring the ancient steps that had guided them for generations. Looking back across the years, the story of those evenings settles like a soft layer of dust over the stone walls, reminding future generations that rituals are less about guaranteeing outcomes than about stitching together moments of shared stillness. The faded faces of the elders, forever hidden in shadow, attest to a continuity that survives even when the river's voice is muted. Children, now grown, still pause at dusk to feel the coolness of the night against their skin, recalling the faint aroma of incense that once rose like quiet hope. The amulets remain on doorframes, their surfaces dull, but their presence a reminder that protection can be as simple as remembering to pause. In the gentle silence that follows each night's end, the village learns that survival is a slow, collective breath, measured not by the absence of drought, but by the persistence of quiet, human connection. As dusk settled over the mud brick houses, the air grew cool enough to carry the soft murmur of families preparing for sleep. Women laid woven mats beside low wooden stools, while children pressed their palms against the cool stone walls, feeling the night's gentle pressure. The appointed night watch, Nefertari, guided the small group of caretakers through a quiet chant that blended the scent of frankincense with the distant croak of night frogs. Their ritual, meant to steady restless dreams, lingered like a thin veil over the courtyard. Yet many villagers still woke with tangled thoughts. In the hush, the blurred silhouette of the high priest could be seen through the doorway. His presence, a muted reminder of the ancient balance between day and dark. One evening, a younger priest named Decoded stepped forward, his voice low yet edged with the heat of a rising sun, insisting that Ra's brilliance should dominate even the black hours. He argued that the lingering shadows encouraged whispers of disorder, and that a louder invocation to the sun god might seal the night's uneasy gaps. The villagers listened, the rustle of papyrus scrolls echoing like a restless wind through the alleyways. Nefertari felt the weight of the claim settle on her shoulders, a subtle pressure akin to the stone seat beneath her. The dispute spread like a slow ripple, unsettling the simple cadence of nightly preparation and planting seeds of doubt within the communal hearth. The council gathered under the amber glow of oil lamps, their faces softened by the flickering light, each outline indistinct, as though a veil of dust had settled upon them, while the younger priest spoke of conquering night with the sun's fire. The elder scribes smiled faintly, noting that the same lanterns that illuminated their words were themselves born of darkness. A quiet chuckle slipped through the crowd as a child accidentally tipped a bowl of dates, the spillage sounding like a tiny applause for the absurdity of the argument. The murmurs turned into a gentle rustle of linen, the sound reminding everyone that even grand declarations are wrapped in ordinary motions. In that moment, the community sensed the paradox of seeking light by demanding more of the very shade that gave it shape, a subtle comedy that settled into the cool night air. As the lamps burned lower, the elders recalled an old stone tablet inscribed with verses about Kansu, the moon's quiet companion to Ra, promising a measured exchange of light and shadow. Their hands traced the worn hieroglyphs, the texture of the stone cool against their fingertips, each line a reminder that balance had once guided the rhythm of sleep. The murmured verses settled over the courtyard like a breathable sigh, soothing the earlier tension with their measured cadence. Nefertari, feeling the familiar weight of authority, nodded slowly, her gesture as steady as the tide that lapped against the distant riverbank. The villagers returned to their mats, the scent of cumin and night jasmine mingling, and the night's pulse steadied into a familiar, unhurried rhythm. By the time the first pale stars pierced the horizon, the community had woven the disputed words into a quiet compromise, acknowledging both the sun's vigor and the moon's gentle watch. Children slept with soft breaths, their blankets fluttering like the calm surface of the Nile at dawn, while the older women hummed a low lullaby that seemed to echo the ancient verses. The rival priest, his face still unseen beneath the shade of his headdress, accepted the shared ritual, finding a modest peace in the subtle surrender to tradition. The night's earlier restlessness faded like a distant drumbeat, leaving behind the soft rustle of reeds and the faint crackle of embers. In the lingering calm, the villagers sensed a humble lesson, that human longing for control is always tempered by the ordinary gestures that hold night together. A quiet reassurance that tomorrow's sun will rise, but tonight remains theirs to steward. When the slender curve of the moon slipped beside a swollen sun on the horizon, the city of Thebes felt a quiet shift in the air. Nefertari, her linen shawl rustling like a distant sigh, arranged a midnight gathering beside the riverbank, where reed boats rested in still water. The lanterns she lit glowed amber, casting soft circles on the sand that trembled slightly under the cool night breeze. Villagers arrived with baskets of dates and barley, their feet leaving faint imprints that would soon be washed away by the slow current. The stage was set for a ritual that promised to stitch together the patterns of day and night into a single, soothing sleep. As darkness deepened, a low murmur rose from the crowd, like the distant ripple of a tired river. The temperature dropped, and people pulled their shawls tighter, feeling the night's invisible weight settle on their shoulders. Unseen faces of the priests lingered in shadow, their outlines blurred by the flickering firelight, adding a subtle sense of uncertainty. Children whispered about restless dreams, their eyelids fluttering against the backdrop of night insects' faint chirps. Nefertari sensed the hesitation, hearing the soft rustle of linen as some hands hesitated before placing offerings on the altar. The air grew still, holding its breath as everyone waited for the moment when the ceremony would finally begin. When the first chant rose, it wove together the bright symbols of the sun, a polished copper disk, and the cool crescent of the moon, each placed on opposite sides of the low stone table. The priest's voice, though hidden behind a veil of incense smoke, sounded both solemn and oddly humorous, as if the gods themselves were sharing a knowing smile. A sudden gust knocked over a bowl of water, spilling cool droplets onto the sand, and the crowd laughed softly at the clumsy blessing. The lanterns flickered in a rhythm that reminded observers of a sleepy heartbeat, turning the solemnity into a gentle parody of daily chores. Yet the blurred silhouettes of the deities remained unseen, their presence hinted only by the play of light and shadow, making the whole scene feel both profound and mundanely ordinary. As the chant waned, a soft glow spread across the river, mirroring the sky's twin lights and soothing the restless tension that had lingered. The villagers inhaled the warm, scented air, feeling the heat of the burning offerings settle into a comforting warmth on their skin. In that moment, a shared vision unfolded. Each person saw a quiet courtyard where families lay on straw mats, the breath of the night wrapping around them like a blanket. The gentle lapping of water against the reeds blended with the distant croak of frogs, creating a lullaby that seemed to pulse in time with the heartbeats of all present. Slowly, the crowd's murmurs faded, replaced by a collective sigh that slipped into the night's stillness. The ceremony concluded with the extinguishing of the lanterns, leaving only the soft afterglow of the moon's reflected silver on the water. In the days that followed, the people of Thebes fell into a rhythm where sleep arrived with the same ease as the river's flow, each night echoing the calm of that midnight rite. Nefertari watched the market stalls open early, noticing how the traders moved with a measured step, their eyes brighter after rested slumber. Occasionally, a child would ask why the lanterns had been turned off, and the elder would smile, pointing to the hidden faces of the gods that never needed to be seen. The memory of the ceremony lingered like the faint scent of incense, reminding them that even ordinary gestures can align the larger cycles of light and darkness. Thus, the city learned that harmony is not a grand proclamation, but a series of small, shared breaths held together through quiet, unhurried nights. When the first integrated rite was woven into the nightly rhythm of the hamlet, women lowered clay bowls of cool river water onto reed mats, while the soft crackle of oil lamps painted the walls a gentle amber. The elderly chief traced the outline of the new sequence with a fingertip that brushed the dust on the floor, his breath mingling with the faint scent of frankincense that drifted from a low bowl. Children sat cross-legged, their eyes adjusting to the dim glow, while the distant murmur of the Nile hummed like a distant lullaby. The ritual began with a shared sip of barley water that touched tongue and throat, a simple tactile reminder that darkness could be welcomed. As the last ember settled, a quiet anticipation settled over the courtyard, the promise of ordered sleep humming in the cool night air. Soon after the rite took root, the village faced subtle frictions that tested its new cadence. A shortage of dried palm fronds left the lamps flickering unevenly, casting jittery shadows across worn stone. The younger men, accustomed to the rush of daytime labor, found the quiet pause unsettling, their shoulders tightening as they listened to the distant clatter of carts on sand. A sudden gust carried the dry scent of dust into the open doorway, rattling the linen curtains and making the ritual's soft chants feel slightly out of sync. Mothers whispered to restless infants, their hands cool against the babies' foreheads, while the communal bowl of water gathered a faint film of night dew. Yet the participants persisted, their breaths slow and measured, holding the uneasy tension like a fragile thread stretched across the evening sky. In the weeks that followed, the ritual settled into a habit that sometimes brushed against its own solemnity, and a quiet irony emerged as villagers began to smile at the very gestures meant to invoke reverence. The figure who once delivered the opening words now appeared only as a silhouette, his face blurred by the wavering flame, a reminder that the sacred could be hidden behind ordinary light. Children, now accustomed to the rhythm, would gently nudge each other's elbows, their soft chuckles echoing against the plastered walls, while the elders raised an indulgent eyebrow at the subtle playfulness. The water in the bowl cooled to a still mirror, reflecting the dim torchlight without pretension, and a faint rustle of palm leaves sounded like a sigh. The ritual, stripped of grandiose expectation, became a modest exchange of gestures, each participant aware that the most profound moments often arrived unannounced, tucked between the hush of night. With time, the nightly rite settled into a smooth current, its cadence matching the slow pulse of the Nile itself. The lamps burned evenly, their amber glow steady as the stars above. The village courtyard settled into a comfortable hush, broken only by the occasional soft creak of a wooden stool or the rustle of linen as someone adjusted a blanket. The cool touch of night air brushed against skin, while the modest scent of incense lingered like a faint memory, neither overpowering nor absent. Residents lay down on reed mats, the rhythm of their breathing aligning with the distant lull of water lapping against the riverbank, creating a tableau of collective rest. In this tranquil equilibrium, the integrated rite no longer felt like a decree, but rather an intimate pattern woven into daily life, guiding each sleeper toward a peaceful horizon. Generations later, a scribe traced the outline of the rite onto papyrus, his reed stylus clicking softly as he recorded each measured step with modest reverence. He noted the texture of the water, the temperature of the lamps, and the way shadows fell on the walls, preserving the sensory details that had guided his ancestors to rest. The parchment, now yellowed by time, highlighted how a simple nightly practice had shaped the community's concept of sleep, turning a practical need into a cultural cornerstone. As the scribe inked the final line, a faint smile traced his lips, aware that the blurred figure of the original priest remained unseen, a quiet testament to humanity's reliance on shared habit rather than lofty myth. The record closed with a soft sigh, echoing the village's enduring lullaby, reminding future readers that even the most ordinary rituals hold a quiet legacy. In the mist-clad valleys of the ancient Andes, the first pale light slips over the stone terraces where the Lamacuna people have set their dwellings. They rise from woven mats, brush cold air off their shoulders, and gather around a low fire that still holds the remnants of the night's ember. Elders, their faces softened by shadow, trade quiet stories of mountain winds, while the younger ones stir steaming pots of quinoa broth. After the tale's end, a hush settles, and the tribe slides into a brief, restorative first sleep, the blankets rustling like soft grasses. This opening pause, brief as a breath, marks the rhythm that will shape the day ahead. Yet the daylight brings a steady demand for labor as the fields await the sun's warm coaxing. Women knead dough on rough wooden tables, while men carve tools from sturdy timber, each motion echoing against the stone walls. A chill wind slips through the cracks, making the fire's glow feel insufficient, and the children's restless feet tap on the earthen floor. The tribe feels an invisible pressure to finish the harvest before the shadows lengthen, a subtle urgency humming beneath the calm. This tension threads through the communal tasks, reminding them that the world outside their valley rarely pauses. Still, the promised second rest lingers like a distant drum, keeping the weariness at bay. Ironically, after a day of relentless motion, the Lamakuna welcome the evening not with exhaustion, but with a second, collective slip into sleep beneath the emerging stars. The same fire that once crackled for stories now glows low, its smoke curling lazily as if reluctant to leave the night still. Children, whose laughter filled the morning, now curl into the same blankets, eyes half closed, yet watching the sky's first constellations appear. Even the oldest hunters, whose faces remain hidden in the dimming light, lean back against the stone, letting the cool air brush their shoulders in place of a warm hearth. The quiet joke of their rhythm, working hard, sleeping twice, and finding solace in the pause, unfolds without a word. A soft satire of human striving. In that mirrored routine, the tribe discovers that the most demanding tasks often end in the simplest of pauses. As twilight deepens, a gentle veil of darkness drapes the valley, and the tribe settles into the second sleep, their bodies forming a quiet constellation on the ground. The night air carries the scent of damp earth and distant pine, while the distant rush of a river provides a low, steady percussion. Hands rest on woven blankets, fingers feeling the texture of alpaca wool, and breathing synchronizes with the soft rustle of nearby grasses. Stars punctuate the sky, their cold light reflected in the calm eyes of those who have surrendered to the night's embrace. In this shared slumber, the community's pulse slows, each heartbeat a reminder of the rhythm that binds them to the mountains and to each other. The silence is not empty, but filled with the unspoken agreement that the world will turn again, and they will awaken anew. When dawn finally returns, the tribe awakens not as individuals, but as a continuum of breaths that have already known the balance of two sleeps. They stretch, feeling the lingering coolness of the night cling to their skin, and notice how the same stones have witnessed countless cycles of work and rest. The pattern of breaking the night into two parts feels both ordinary and profound, a reminder that humanity's attempt to command time often yields to simple, measured pauses. Their imperfect hands, sometimes clumsy in weaving or faltering in carving, become graceful in the shared moments of quiet repose. The Lamakuna understand, without needing grand myth, that the rhythm of two sleeps is a modest concession to the earth's own pulse, a gentle irony that steadies their hearts as the valley fills with the warm glow of a new sun. The tribe carries forward this legacy, aware that the true history of a people is written in the small, sleep-streaked intervals between their days. The tribe of the lower river valley rose with the first light, their huts opening like yawning shells to the cool mist. Women gathered fire-dried maize, while men polished river stones, and the children slipped between the low walls for a brief midday rest that the rhythm of the day called the first sleep. At noon, the heat settled on their shoulders, and the sound of cicadas blended with the soft rustle of woven mats as the community settled into a quiet half-hour of suspended wakefulness. When the sun tipped toward the western ridge, a shaman from the distant coastal plains arrived, his cloak dusted with salty spray, his face hidden behind a veil of shadow. He carried a bundle of shells that clinked faintly, marking the moment when the tribe's two-phase rhythm would be tested. The shaman spoke in low tones about an eclipse that would swallow the moon for a heartbeat, a darkness that could unbalance the night's order. Elders leaned on their staffs, feeling the rough bark, and heard the wind whisper through the leaves, as if the forest itself held its breath, while the fire crackled, sending sparks to the cool air. Their faces, blurred by the dimming light, reflected a cautious curiosity, as some argued that the interruption might force the people to abandon the gentle division of work and rest, merging the two sleeps into a single, uncertain vigil. The tension grew as the distant drumbeat of anticipation rose, each reverberation echoing against the stone foundations of their communal dwelling. The younger members, eyes bright with restless energy, began to whisper about the safety of sleeping in two separate phases, as if a single uninterrupted slumber would protect them from unseen shadows. They fidgeted on the edge of the mats, their fingertips tracing the worn patterns of the woven blankets, while the elders stared at the sky where the moon was already waning. An ironic chuckle passed through the camp when a teenage girl suggested that the eclipse might be a convenient excuse to stay up and finish the unfinished pottery, the clay cool against her palm. The shaman, his silhouette blurred by the flickering firelight, listened without comment, the shells in his bundle now sounding like distant rain. The irony lay in the fact that the tribe had long trusted the night's natural pauses. Yet, a celestial event now made them question the very rhythm they had cultivated. As the eclipse slipped across the sky, a thin crescent of light returned, and the community felt the familiar pull of the second sleep drawing near. The elders, after a measured pause, agreed to keep the biphasic pattern, trusting that the brief darkness was only a shadow passing over the fire's glow. The women slipped back into their woven hammocks, the fabric creaking softly as bodies settled, while the men lowered their spears and let the night air cool the sweat on their foreheads. The shaman, his face still unseen, placed the shells beside the sleeping mats, their gentle clink echoing the steady beat of heartbeats in the dark. Calm returned to the camp, the night breathing steadily, the routine of waking, resting, and sleeping resuming its timeless flow. In the quiet hours after the eclipse, the crackle of embers faded into a low hum, and the tribe lay in two halves of night, each pause a reminder of the balance they maintained. The younger voices settled into murmurs, their earlier doubts softened by the steady rhythm of breath against cool blankets. The shaman rose silently, his cloak brushing the ground, and vanished into the night, his silhouette a blurred echo among the trees. The elders watched the dark sky, feeling the subtle shift of stars that seemed to approve the endurance of their customs. As dawn's first amber brushed the horizon, the tribe awoke together, carrying the modest lesson that even moments of celestial interruption cannot easily unravel a practiced harmony. When the sun slipped behind the ridge, the village settled into its first sleep. Elders curled on woven mats, the soft rustle of furs accompanying the crackle of a single fire. After the night deepened, a quiet pause allowed the younger hunters to rise, stretch, and tend the seedlings before the second sleep at first light. The cool air brushed the clay walls, and the scent of damp earth mingled with ember smoke. In this rhythm, time seemed to fold, each half-night a gentle echo of the previous. The community moved with a measured steadiness that felt almost scripted. A sudden hush fell as an eclipse swallowed the sky, turning the bright afternoon into a bruised twilight. Within minutes, rain slammed the valley, turning the creek into a roaring river that spilled over the footpaths. The fire's smoke, once a steady veil, scattered into the wind, leaving the hearth cold and the air sharp with mist. Without the comforting glow, the people found themselves unable to retreat to their mats, eyes forced open by the relentless drumming of water. Fatigue settled like a heavy blanket, yet the storm demanded every hand to shore the thatch and steady the stored grain. The night, once divided, stretched into an unbroken vigil. By the time the rain eased, the fields glistened with puddles, and the young women noticed the tender shoots drooping under the unexpected weight of water. A few whispered jokes about the broken cycle, their smiles faint under the dim lantern light as they tried to mend the bent stalks with gentle hands. The elders, their faces blurred by the flickering glow, offered quiet advice about letting the soil breathe, while the youngest laughed at the irony of being more awake than ever. The two sleep pattern, once as reliable as sunrise, now felt like a loose thread tugging at the fabric of daily life. Yet the community's rhythm persisted, measured not by strict intervals, but by the soft cadence of shared labor. In the background, the rain's echo lingered, a reminder of nature's indifferent timing. When the clouds finally withdrew, a chill settled over the valley, and the fire was rekindled with slow, deliberate strokes. The ember light painted weary faces with a warm amber, while the night air carried the faint scent of wet earth and pine resin. Around the hearth, a few elders hummed low songs, their voices matching the steady crackle of wood, inviting a return to the familiar cadence of rest. The younger members settled onto the mats, the cool ground soothing sore muscles, and the second sleep began without the urgency of a storm. Outside, the river retreated to its banks, leaving smooth stones that caught moonlight in quiet patches. In that stillness, the tribe found a reclaimed balance, the broken cycle easing into a softer, if altered, pattern. Days later, the villagers gathered to share the story of the night the sky darkened and the water rose, each recounting the moment with a gentle smile. They noted how the unexpected wakefulness had forced a closer watch over the seedlings, which now grew sturdier after the extra attention. The broken rhythm, they agreed, had revealed a resilience that lay beneath the surface of routine. With the fire's smoke returning to its familiar drift, the two-sleep practice resumed, though the interval between rests now carried a faint echo of the storm's cadence. The tribe understood that patterns could bend without breaking, and that harmony was found in the space between disruption and return. In the calm of the evening, they rested, their breathing syncing with the soft night, a silent testament to human adaptability. The tribe assembled at the ancient stone circle before the first stars appeared, the cool air brushing the pine needles that carpeted the ground. Women carried woven baskets of dried corn, their woven patterns catching the faint amber glow of torches. Men settled on smooth basalt slabs, the stones chill seeping into their thighs as they lowered themselves after a day's labor. Children whispered among themselves, the sound muted by the night's hush, while the shaman, a figure whose face remained a blur behind the flickering light, adjusted a bundle of sage. The air smelled of damp earth and faint smoke, and the community prepared for a practice that would stitch together two separate sleeps. As the night deepened, the first sleep settled like a heavy blanket, but the hush was interrupted by a restless wind that rattled the loose stones. Some elders stretched, feeling the lingering ache of muscles, still remembering the morning's hunt, while others frowned at the lingering shadows in the periphery. The shaman moved slowly around the circle, hands dragging over the cold stones, the sound of each touch echoing like a faint drumbeat. A subtle unease grew, because the second sleep, traditionally a quiet interlude, had been postponed by the chill that clung to the valley. The tribe sensed a thin thread of fatigue pulling at their collective breath, urging them to find a way to reunite the splintered rests. When the shaman finally lifted the veil of sage smoke, his silhouette appeared as a dark smear against the starlight, his features forever hidden by the swirling ember. He began a chant that sounded both like an ancient lullaby and a playful hum, the melody slipping in and out of the listeners, half dreams, as if the ceremony itself were aware of its own solemnity. Ironically, the very act meant to unite the sleeps caused a brief pause in the wind, which settled into a lazy sigh, as if the night itself were taking a nap. The tribe's eyes drooped, yet their hands continued to sway the woven mats, creating a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the earth. The quiet humor of the moment lay in how a hidden face could command an entire community to glide between wakefulness and rest without a single word of command. Soon the chant settled into a steady pulse, and the twin sleeps seemed to fold together like two sheets of warm bark pressed against one another. Light from the torches softened, casting a mellow amber that painted the stones with gentle shadows, while the temperature rose just enough for breath to become visible in slow, languid clouds. Women began to hum in low harmony, their voices blending with the shaman's low timbre, creating a soundscape that felt like the slow rocking of a canoe on a still lake. The community rested on the stone circle, bodies relaxed, eyelids heavy, yet minds alert to the subtle shift in the night's rhythm. In that quiet convergence, the ceremony achieved its purpose. The first and second sleeps realigned, and a sense of renewed vigor settled over the gathered people. When dawn's pale light brushed the horizon, the tribe awoke with a gentle stretch, the scent of fresh pine mingling with the lingering aroma of sage. They moved slowly, each step feeling steadier, as if the night's ceremony had tightened the fibers of their collective resolve. Children laughed quietly while tying new knots in their baskets, a simple act that now seemed to echo the entwined sleeps of the previous night. The shaman, still unseen behind a veil of morning mist, placed a single stone at the center of the circle, a silent reminder that the harmony they experienced was a fragile construct, kept alive by attentive hands. As the tribe dispersed to tend fields and fire pits, a lingering calm remained, a soft acknowledgement that even ordinary rhythms contain the capacity to restore a community's strength. At the edge of the high plateau, the Lamakuna people rose with the pale amber of dawn, their woven blankets folding back like soft sighs. The village huts, built from adobe and thatch, exhaled the cool breath of the night as the first workers stepped onto the dewy terraces. In this place, the rhythm of 2 sleeps was as ordinary as the pattern of the river. A short rest after the evening fire, then another quiet pause before the sunrise. Children gathered shells and dry grass, their fingers brushing the rough texture of the earth, while elders whispered about the balance of labor and rest. The scent of roasted quinoa drifted from communal ovens, a subtle reminder that nourishment followed the quiet hours. As the sun lifted, the fields glimmered with a promise of harvest, stitched together by the gentle cadence of biphasic sleep. Weeks later, a thin band of shadow slipped across the sky, and the community felt a sudden chill that rustled the maize stalks. The elders paused their weaving, eyes narrowing at the unexpected eclipse, while the younger ones pressed their faces against the cool mud walls, trying to understand the dimming light. A hush settled, broken only by the soft crackle of firewood, as the flames seemed to flicker in time with the dark veil. The children, uneasy, asked the hidden shaman why the sun had forgotten its path, their voices trembling like thin reeds. The shaman's face remained unseen, obscured by a veil of dust and shadow, offering only the steady rhythm of his breath as reassurance. Tension lingered, yet the village continued its tasks, each movement measured against the slow pulse of the dimming day. When the sun returned, its light seemed a little slower, as if reluctant to rush after the brief interruption. The harvesters found the corn kernels glistening with a faint silver sheen, a quiet irony that the darkness had left a subtle polish on their bounty. The elders laughed softly, the sound mingling with the rustle of husks, noting how the 2 sleeps had prepared bodies to notice such small miracles. Children, now restless, tried to mimic the shaman's gestures, their tiny hands moving in a clumsy yet earnest dance, while the shaman's silhouette stayed blurred against the firelight. The community shared a modest meal of stew and fresh tubers, the warmth spreading through their limbs like a gentle embrace. In the background, the night deepened, but the rhythm of pause and work held steady, unperturbed by celestial quirks. Days slipped into weeks, and the village settled back into its familiar cadence, the 2 sleeps weaving together labor and leisure like twin threads. The fields yielded a bountiful harvest, rows of golden quinoa swaying under a sky that had learned to be patient after the eclipse. Women sang low lullabies while grinding grain, their voices resonating with the soft rustle of fabric and the occasional creak of a wooden beam. Men rested on woven mats between chores, the cool earth against their backs, reminding them of the night's quiet counsel. Children, now more accustomed to the pattern, fell asleep after the evening stories and awoke refreshed for the morning's lessons, their eyes bright with a half-sleep smile. The whole cycle felt like a slow river, each bend predictable, yet still holding the subtle surprise of a reflected sunbeam. As the season waned, the Lamakuna elders gathered the younger generation beneath a canopy of amber leaves to recount the tale of the eclipse and the steady two sleeps that guided them through it. Their words fell like gentle rain, each syllable touching the listener's shoulders, reminding them that resilience often lives in the spaces between wakefulness and rest. The villagers felt a quiet pride in the way their bodies and spirits had synchronized with the land's own pulse, a modest triumph that required no grand proclamation. The unseen faces of the shaman remained a soft mystery, serving only as a quiet backdrop to the community's own narrative. In the lingering glow of twilight, the fire's embers whispered of continuity, and the night settled with a contented sigh, as if history itself were gently tucking the people in. The story ended not with a climax, but with a lingering sense of calm, the kind that settles after a long, unhurried walk along familiar paths.